January 1954, Attala County, Mississippi. A teenage girl gives birth on a farm with no electricity and no running water. The father isn't there. The mother leaves within months. The baby is left with a grandmother who disciplines with a switch cut from the yard. Nobody sends a reporter. Nobody marks the occasion. In the ledger of American poverty, this is not even a notable entry. 49 years later, that baby appears on the Forbes Billionaires list. First time in history a black woman has ever been on it. Not first black woman in her industry, first in history. Full stop. And here's the number that should stop you cold. At her peak, Oprah Winfrey's show reached more American households every single weekday than the moon landing broadcast reached in its entirety. Think about what that means. A woman who grew up without indoor plumbing became by pure reach one of the most heard voices in the history of this country. But the wealth, the actual $1 billion, had almost nothing to do with her salary. Networks paid her well, enormously well, and she took the money. But she also did something that almost no performer in the history of American television thought to do, or was allowed to do, or was bold enough to demand. She kept the rights, the show, the studio, the library, hers. Harpo Productions. Oprah spelled backward, named that way on purpose. A quiet private joke aimed at every executive who ever looked at her and saw inventory instead of ownership. This is the story of how she built it. It starts in a Mississippi county most Americans couldn't find on a map. It ends at $1 billion. And what happens in between is not what you've been told. Let's establish exactly where we are. The year is 1986. The United States is in the middle of the Reagan era. The economy is recovering. Cable television is just beginning to fracture the broadcast monopoly. Phil Donahue is the undisputed king of daytime talk. His show has run for nearly 20 years and defined what the format looks like. Audience participation, social issues, a white avuncular host who treats his studio guests like guests. Nobody in television has seriously imagined that format being replaced. Certainly not by a 32-year-old black woman from Baltimore who'd been handed a struggling local morning show in Chicago as what some executives privately considered a career-ending assignment. That's important context. Because when WLS-TV gave Oprah Winfrey the AM Chicago slot in January 1984, it wasn't meant as a launching pad. It was a problem slot. Low ratings, bad demographics. No resources filmed his show out of that same city. And the assumption in the building was that nobody was going to unseat him on his home turf, least of all an unknown black woman, whose only television experience was as a co-anchor and reporter in Baltimore and Nashville. Within 1 month, AM Chicago surpassed Donahue in Chicago ratings. Within 3 months, it was the highest-rated show in the city. Within a year, the format had been expanded to a full hour, and by 1985, film critic Roger Ebert, yes, that Roger Ebert, watched a taping and told producer King World Productions that whoever they were looking at, they needed to syndicate her nationally, immediately. Ebert's exact words, according to the Hollywood Reporter's retrospective coverage, were that she was going to be the most powerful woman in America within 5 years. He was off by a few months. What's interesting is that none of this was considered inevitable. It wasn't even considered particularly likely. The television landscape in the mid-1980s was not a welcoming environment for black women in lead roles. The assumption, held openly by many network executives, was that black performers could be sidekicks, reporters, characters, but could not anchor a national daily program and sustain a mainstream white audience over time. Oprah Winfrey proved that assumption was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. But here's the thing. To understand how she did it, and more importantly why the wealth followed in the specific way that it did, we need to go back much further than 1986. We need to go back to a specific place, a place most Americans have never visited and have no reason to visit, a small farming community in Attala County, Mississippi, about 60 miles northeast of Jackson. We need to go back to January 29, 1954. To the moment Orpah Gail Winfrey, named after a biblical figure from the Book of Ruth, a name that the local county clerk simply misspelled on the birth certificate, entered a world with almost nothing in it to suggest what was coming. There's a version of Oprah's story that's been told so many times it's become smooth, polished, almost frictionless. The poor girl, the difficult childhood, the breakthrough, the billions, the meaning. What gets lost in that smooth telling is the specific texture of how bad things actually were, and how many decisions she made, deliberate, strategic, sometimes ruthless decisions, to ensure she never ended up back there. Understanding the poverty isn't about sentimentality. It's about understanding the engine. The deprivation wasn't background, it was fuel. So let's go back to Mississippi, and let's not clean it up. Kosciuszko, Mississippi, in the 1950s, was not a place that produced billionaires. It was a small town, fewer than 7,000 people at its peak, embedded in the agricultural flatlands of central Mississippi, surrounded by cotton fields and Baptist churches, and the kind of silence that only exists in places where the economy has been slowly leaving for decades. The county's per capita income was among the lowest in the country. The county's black population lived under a still functioning system of legal segregation, separate schools, separate waiting rooms, a social order maintained not just by custom, but by law and by the explicit threat of violence. Oprah was born on a farm outside the town itself, a property owned by her maternal grandmother, Hattie Mae Lee. The farm had no running water for much of her early childhood. It had an outhouse, it had a wood-burning stove, it had chickens and pigs, and the particular poverty that isn't photogenic, it's just grinding, relentless, and invisible to anyone passing through. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was 18 years old and unmarried when Oprah was born. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, was a young man from Nashville who'd had no plans to become a father. He wasn't present. Vernita left for Milwaukee shortly after the birth, leaving the infant Oprah with her grandmother on that farm in Attala County. This is where Oprah Winfrey began. And here's the thing about Hattie Mae Lee. She was strict, religious, and in many ways difficult. She believed in corporal punishment. She believed in discipline. She believed that a black girl in the American South in the 1950s had exactly one path to survival: absolute conformity to the rules of the world she'd been born into. She taught Oprah to read before kindergarten, not because she had grand ambitions for her granddaughter, but because Hattie Mae herself was deeply literate, steeped in scripture, and believed that the word was the foundation of everything. That reading would matter enormously. It always does. Oprah has described her early years in Kosciuszko with a strange mix of clarity and affection. Not romanticized, but not entirely bleak either. The animals were her companions. The church was the center of social life. She performed recitations in front of the congregation from the time she could stand up straight, reading scripture, delivering passages, commanding attention. At 3 years old, she was standing in front of crowds and making them listen. Think about what that means in context. In a small southern black church in 1957, a 3-year-old girl reciting scripture with the confidence and cadence of an adult was not simply cute, it was remarkable. And the people in those pews recognized it. They would tell Hattie Mae, "That child is going to do something." They couldn't have named what, but they knew she was different. What's interesting is that Oprah herself has cited those early church performances as her first understanding of a specific feeling, the feeling of an audience responding to you, the resonance between speaker and listener, the moment when a room shifts toward you because of what you've said and how you've said it. She was 3, and she already knew she wanted more of that. You see, most people understand Oprah's later success as a product of empathy, of her ability to make guests and viewers feel seen and heard. That's accurate, but the empathy was built on something more foundational, something she discovered in that Mississippi church before she could tie her own shoes. The mechanics of attention. How to get it, how to hold it, how to direct it. By the time she was 6, that early stability, such as it was, had collapsed entirely. Hattie Mae's health declined, and Oprah was sent north to Milwaukee to live with her mother Vernita, who had by then established a life there with a new partner and 2 other children. The transition was devastating in ways that weren't immediately visible. The farm had been poor, but it had been ordered, consistent. Milwaukee was chaotic. Vernita worked long hours as a housemaid. She had almost no time for her daughter. The small apartment was crowded. The neighborhood was nothing like the rural quiet of Mississippi. Oprah was 6 years old, in a new city, with a mother who was functionally a stranger, surrounded by siblings she barely knew, in conditions that were poor in a completely different and more disorienting way than Kosciuszko had been. And the worst of it was still ahead. The specific horrors of what happened to Oprah Winfrey between the ages of 9 and 13 are part of the historical record now. She put them there herself. But in the late 1950s and early 1960s, they were simply the private catastrophe of a small girl in an overcrowded apartment with no one paying close enough attention. There's a particular kind of silence that surrounds childhood trauma in poor families. It's not a conspiracy of silence. It's not organized or deliberate. It's more that the adults are too stretched, too exhausted, too caught up in their own survival to see what is happening to the children in the next room. That was Milwaukee in the early 1960s for Oprah Winfrey. She has spoken about it publicly, extensively, and with what can only be described as clinical precision, the kind of precision that comes from years of processing something so painful that the only way to survive it is to understand it completely. She was sexually abused, beginning around age 9, by multiple people trusted by her family, a cousin, an uncle, a family friend. This continued for years. Nobody in her household was aware of it, or if they were, nobody stopped it. The abuse is not a footnote in Oprah's story. It is, by her own account, the event that shaped everything that came after, not because it defined her limits, but because surviving it and eventually speaking about it became the central mechanism of her entire career. The decision to talk about it on national television in 1986 would be one of the most significant cultural moments in daytime TV history. But we're not there yet. In Milwaukee, without the structure of Hattie Mae's farm, Oprah began to struggle. She became, as she has described it, fast, seeking attention and validation from boys, acting out in school, testing every boundary available to her. By the time she was 13, she had run away from home. By 14, she was pregnant. The baby, a boy born prematurely, died shortly after birth. Oprah has said this was the moment she understood that her life could go in one of two directions, and that nobody was going to make the choice for her. She was 14 years old, and she had already absorbed more catastrophe than most people encounter in a lifetime. She was in Milwaukee, in poverty, with a mother who couldn't manage her and an extended family that had already damaged her in the most fundamental ways. What happened next is the part of the story that gets flattened in the inspirational poster version, but it matters enormously. Vernita Lee, exasperated and overwhelmed, sent Oprah to Nashville to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey, and his wife, Zelma. Vernon Winfrey was, by all accounts, a strict and serious man. He owned a barbershop. He was active in his church. He believed in education and discipline with an intensity that bordered on severity. He gave Oprah a reading list and required her to produce a book report every week. He held her to a standard of behavior that was not negotiable. He had clear expectations and he enforced them. This is not an inspirational metaphor. This was, for Oprah, a literal rescue. You see, the structure that her grandmother had provided in Mississippi and that had crumbled in Milwaukee was reimposed in Nashville by a father who barely knew her, but who understood that the only thing between this girl and a ruined life was an environment of non-negotiable accountability. Vernon wasn't warm, not the way the word is usually understood, but he was consistent, he was present, he was paying attention. Oprah thrived. Within a year of arriving in Nashville, she was an honor student at East Nashville High School. She joined the debate team. She joined the drama club. She won a scholarship from a local fire station speaking contest, reading scripture, the same skill she'd developed in that Kosciuszko church, and was invited to tour Nashville's radio station, WVOL, as part of the prize. A radio producer heard her read copy during that tour. He hired her on the spot. She was 16 years old, and she was about to become, by any reasonable measure, the youngest news anchor in the history of Nashville broadcast journalism. The story of that radio job is almost too neat. A talent discovered at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. But look closer. That right place was a contest she'd entered because she was obsessed with performance. The right moment was created by Vernon's reading lists, by years of church recitations, by a child who had no other resources except language and had spent her entire life learning to use it. Here's what's interesting about Vernon's intervention. He told Oprah explicitly, repeatedly, that she was responsible for her own life. Not just capable of taking responsibility, responsible, full stop. That there would be no circumstances that excused failure, no poverty, no abuse, no background that justified giving up. This is a hard philosophy. It contains within it an unfairness. It asks people who've been damaged by forces outside their control to take full ownership of what comes next. Oprah did not dispute the unfairness. She accepted the challenge. By the time she graduated from East Nashville High School in 1971, she had won a full scholarship to Tennessee State University based on her performance in an oratorical contest. She had been named one of 2 students to represent Nashville at a White House conference on youth. She had already appeared on radio and was beginning to think about television. She was 17. She had been abandoned, abused, made pregnant, and relocated across 2 states. She had survived things that consume people. And she had, somehow, partly by luck, mostly by will, and significantly because of a father in Nashville who refused to let her slide, emerged not just intact but extraordinary. The television industry had no idea what was coming. Tennessee State University in the early 1970s was an HBCU, a historically black college and university, on the north side of Nashville, and it was, by the standards of the era and of Oprah's trajectory, exactly the right place to be. She enrolled in 1971 as a communications major. She was, by multiple faculty accounts, an exceptional student, not always in the traditional academic sense, though she was certainly intelligent, but in the sense that she understood instinctively what she was there to learn. She was studying communication, not literature, not history, not pre-law. She was studying the architecture of how information moves between people. While still a freshman at TSU, she was offered a full-time position at WTVF-TV, Nashville's CBS affiliate, as a co-anchor on the evening news. She was 19 years old. She would have been the city's first black female co-anchor at a major network affiliate. There was a problem. The job conflicted with her class schedule. Her father, Vernon, wanted her to finish her degree. The tension between these 2 imperatives, formal education versus immediate professional opportunity, was one of the first genuinely hard choices of her adult life. She took the job. She eventually completed her degree later, but the decision in that moment was the decision of someone who understood that her education was already happening, that it had been happening her entire life, and that the classroom version of it was a credential, not the thing itself. This is worth pausing on because it reveals something important about how Oprah has always thought. She has never been romantic about process when opportunity was available. She has been criticized for this, called impatient, insufficiently credentialed, too quick to trust her instincts. But the instincts were, by this point, forged in more experience than most people accumulate in a lifetime. At WTBF, she developed quickly. Her co-anchor work was technically competent and occasionally exceptional, but she was increasingly aware that reading the news was not what she was built for. She was built for conversation, for the unrehearsed, responsive, live engagement with another person in front of a camera. Reading copy was like putting a concert pianist to work on scales. Not wrong, but not the thing. In 1976, she was recruited by WJZ-TV in Baltimore as a reporter and co-anchor. This was a bigger market, a bigger stage, and initially, a bigger problem. Her news director in Baltimore didn't know what to do with her. He reportedly told her she was too emotional for hard news, that she cried at sad stories, that she got too involved, that she lacked the professional detachment the format required. Look, in retrospect, every one of those criticisms was a description of the exact qualities that would make her the most successful television host in history: the emotional engagement, the inability to maintain detachment, the instinct to connect rather than report. In 1976, those were liabilities. By 1986, they were the product. In Baltimore, frustrated with the news format, Oprah was reassigned to a local morning talk show called People Are Talking. This was not a prestigious assignment. It was, in the hierarchy of television news, a demotion. But the format, 2 hosts, studio guests, audience interaction, open-ended conversation, fit her like a custom garment. The show's first episode aired in August 1978. By the second episode, it was outperforming its competition in the Baltimore market. By the end of the first year, Oprah was pulling ratings that the station hadn't seen in years for the time slot. She stayed in Baltimore for 8 years. 8 years of daily live television. 8 years of conducting thousands of hours of interview, managing studio audiences, handling live guests, developing an instinct for pacing and subject and emotional temperature that no journalism school teaches, because it cannot be taught. It can only be accumulated. The truth is, those 8 years in Baltimore were the real education. Vernon's reading lists had given her intellectual range. The church recitations had given her physical presence and timing. But Baltimore gave her something that would prove to be her most powerful professional tool: the ability to make a complete stranger feel, in front of a live audience and a rolling camera, that they were the only person in the room. It sounds simple. It is not simple. It is almost impossible to do consistently, and most people who attempt it in a television context come across as either synthetic or invasive. When Oprah did it, it felt true, because it was true. She genuinely wanted to know. She genuinely cared about the answers. And audiences, first in Baltimore, then in Chicago, then in 48 million American homes, could tell the difference. By 1983, her contract in Baltimore was up. She was 30 years old. She had spent 8 years in a city she'd never intended to stay in, doing a format she'd never intended to stay in, and she had turned both into a masterclass in how television actually works. When WLS-TV Chicago called, she was ready. More ready, it turned out, than anyone in that building could possibly have understood. January 2nd, 1984. The date matters. That was the morning Oprah Winfrey sat down in the host's chair at WLS-TV's AM Chicago for the first time and looked directly into the camera. The show had been averaging roughly 22% of its target audience. Phil Donahue across town was pulling 3 times that. 1 month later, AM Chicago had overtaken Donahue in the Chicago ratings. How? This is the question that television executives asked for years afterward, and most of the analyses they produced were incomplete because they were looking for a strategic explanation, a format change, a booking coup, a production improvement. What actually happened was simpler and more radical. Oprah walked out and was completely herself. Not a performer playing a host, not a moderator guiding a pre-structured conversation, just a woman, enormously intelligent and enormously curious, talking to people the way she talked to people in her real life, with absolute undiluted attention. The Chicago audience had never seen this before, not in this format, not at this hour. Donahue was good, genuinely skilled, but he was operating from a journalistic model. He asked questions because he had prepared questions. Oprah asked questions because she needed to know the answers. Viewers could feel that distinction, even if they couldn't articulate it. By September 1985, the show had been expanded to a full hour and renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. That same month, film director Steven Spielberg cast her in The Color Purple, a massive mainstream film adaptation of Alice Walker's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, as Sophia, a supporting role that earned her an Academy Award nomination. Think about the sequence. Within 20 months of arriving in Chicago as a relatively unknown local host, Oprah Winfrey had become the highest-rated daytime host in the city's history and received an Oscar nomination. This is not a normal career arc. This does not happen to people. It was happening to her. Roger Ebert's intervention, his pitch to King World Productions, the syndication company, that they needed to pick up the show immediately, came in late 1985. King World had made its fortune syndicating Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. Those were game shows. Predictable, scalable, reliable. A talk show built entirely around a single host's personality was a much riskier proposition. If the host changed, the show ceased to exist. King World took the risk. The national syndication deal was signed for the 1986-87 season. Here's the thing most people don't know about that deal. The arrangement wasn't simply a distribution agreement, where WLS or its parent company ABC owned the show and Oprah took a salary. The structure that was negotiated, largely through Oprah's insistence, backed by the leverage of a host who was already demonstrating she could walk away and take the audience with her, gave Oprah an ownership stake in her own program. Not immediately, not fully, but the seeds of what became Harpo Productions were planted in those 1986 negotiations. By 1988, she had gone further. She purchased complete ownership of the show and the production studio. Harpo Productions, Harpo Oprah backward, chosen deliberately, a small defiant joke aimed at an industry that had not seen her coming, became the production entity behind the Oprah Winfrey Show. She was 34 years old, and she owned her own television show. A show reaching 10 million daily viewers. Let me put this in perspective. At the time, no black person and no woman in the history of American television had owned the production studio behind their own major syndicated program. The precedent did not exist. There was no template for what Oprah did in 1988, which is precisely why she was able to do it. The industry's gatekeepers hadn't thought to build a gate for that particular door. The 1986 national launch was the pivot point. Within the first season of national syndication, The Oprah Winfrey Show was airing in 120 markets, reaching demographics that advertisers desperately wanted. Women won 8, 5, 4, across every racial and economic category, with a consistency and loyalty that no other daytime program could match. King World valued the property at approximately $125 million during syndication negotiations. By modern standards, that sounds modest. In 1986, for a daytime talk show hosted by a black woman in its first year of national syndication, it was an almost inconceivable number. Advertisers materialized immediately. Procter & Gamble, General Foods, Johnson & Johnson, the major consumer goods companies whose entire business model depended on reaching American women in their homes during the day, recognized that The Oprah Winfrey Show was not just a hit. It was an access point, a direct line into the living rooms and kitchens and emotional lives of exactly the people they needed to reach. But the commercial success, enormous as it was already becoming secondary to something harder to quantify. Because in the fall of 1986, during one of the early national episodes, Oprah Winfrey sat across from a guest discussing childhood sexual abuse and stopped the show. She looked into the camera. She said simply that she knew what this guest was describing, that it had happened to her too. This had not been planned. It was not in any production rundown. Her producers, by multiple accounts, had no warning it was coming. Oprah simply heard something true being said, recognized it as her own truth, and said so. The studio went silent in the way that rooms go silent when something real has just happened in a space designed for performance. The audience response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of letters, calls that backed up the switchboard for days, women and men, writing to say that they had never heard anyone with a microphone say what they knew to be true about their own lives. This was the moment The Oprah Winfrey Show became something other than a television program. It became a cultural institution, and the woman at its center became something other than a host. The next decade would prove just how far that transformation could go. Phil Donahue was not wrong to be worried. He watched the Chicago ratings in early 1984 with the specific discomfort of someone watching a natural phenomenon they can't quite classify. He had pioneered audience participation daytime television. He had built the format. He was good at it, demonstrably, measurably good. And he was being beaten by someone who wasn't playing by the rules of the format he'd invented. The method Oprah used was not, on the surface, revolutionary. Talk to guests, include the audience, discuss important and sometimes difficult topics. These were all things Donahue did, but the philosophy underneath was completely different, and the difference compounded over time until it created a gap that no other daytime program ever fully closed. Donahue's model was journalistic, issues first, emotion second. He was an interviewer whose curiosity was primarily intellectual. What is happening here? What does it mean? What do viewers need to understand? Oprah's model was relational, emotion first, issue second. Her primary question was not what is happening, but how does it feel, and what do we do with that feeling? This sounds like a distinction that should matter more to therapy graduate students than to television executives. In 1984, most television executives agreed. By 1990, the ratings had converted almost all of them. Here's what's interesting about the relational model. It created loyalty that the journalistic model couldn't replicate. When viewers watched Donahue, they were being informed. When they watched Oprah, they were, and this word is used deliberately, being witnessed. The distinction is enormous. To be informed is a transaction. To be witnessed is a relationship. Oprah understood this intuitively, but she also worked to develop it methodically. She prepared for guests with a thoroughness that surprised most of them, not just reading their books or reviewing their cases, but asking her production staff to find out what her guests actually cared about, what they were afraid to say, what they most needed to be heard on. Then she would find the path into that specific truth in real time, live, with a studio audience watching. Consider the 1988 episode filmed in Forsyth County, Georgia, an all-white county that had not had a black resident in 75 years. Oprah traveled there and conducted a live town hall with the white residents. This was not the kind of booking that produced comfortable television. Several residents expressed views that were explicitly racist, on camera, in front of a black host and a national audience. Oprah did not shut the conversation down. She did not debate. She asked questions. Simple, persistent, calm questions that placed the burden of articulation on the people speaking, that required them to hear their own words coming back at them in the silence that followed. That episode became one of the most discussed in the show's history. Not because Oprah won an argument, but because she created a space where something true was said, and the audience was left to decide what to do with it. Look, this is a sophisticated editorial philosophy. It requires enormous self-discipline to execute, the discipline of someone who has a strong opinion, who is being visibly challenged or disrespected, to not deploy the opinion, to trust that the question is more powerful than the answer. Oprah had that discipline, not naturally. Anyone who's read her accounts of her early career knows she had to develop it, had to learn to override the impulse to react. But she developed it consistently enough that it became the show's signature. The method also included something that her competitors almost never attempted: consistent, deliberate self-disclosure. Oprah talked about her weight on television, when no television host talked about their weight. She talked about her childhood poverty, when no successful television host talked about poverty. She talked about her abuse, when the subject of childhood sexual abuse was still largely hidden from mainstream media. She talked about her failed relationships, her fear of abandonment, her complicated relationship with food, her spiritual beliefs, her doubts. This was strategic, but it wasn't cynical. The disclosures were real. The calculation was simply that if she disclosed something true about herself, the guest across from her would be more likely to disclose something true about themselves, and the viewer at home would be more likely to recognize something true about themselves. The method worked at a scale that still seems almost impossible to explain. By 1990, the Oprah Winfrey Show had an estimated 22 million daily viewers. By the mid-1990s, when the show was at its absolute peak, roughly 46 million people watched each week. Consider what that number represents. The United States in 1995 had a population of roughly 263 million. One show hosted by one person was reaching nearly 1 in 5 Americans with meaningful regularity. The advertisers had not miscalculated. Neither had King World. Neither had Oprah. But the scale of the success was creating pressures that nobody, not her producers, not her business partners, certainly not the television executives who doubted her, had fully anticipated. Because at a certain size, a cultural institution attracts a certain kind of attention, and not all of it is admiring. In November 1988, Oprah Winfrey walked onto her own stage in a pair of size 10 Calvin Klein jeans, pulling a wagon loaded with 67 pounds of animal fat behind her. She had lost 67 pounds on a liquid diet called Optifast. The scene, the jeans, the wagon, the triumphant entrance, was one of the most watched moments in the show's history up to that point. The audience exploded. The cameras captured her turning, laughing, pulling the wagon. It was a celebration. Within 2 years, she had gained the weight back. All of it and more. This is where Oprah's story becomes genuinely complicated in ways that the rags to riches narrative tends to smooth over. Here was a woman with absolute control over a multi-million-dollar production company, with 22 million daily viewers, with the ear of every major advertiser in America, and she could not, despite enormous effort and public accountability, maintain control over her own body. She talked about this too, because she talked about everything, and the audiences who had watched the triumphant wagon entrance watched the subsequent confessions with the same attention, the same recognition. Because here was the thing about Oprah's viewers: they weren't watching a success story. They were watching a person who failed at things, who struggled with the same unglamorous battles they struggled with. The weight was a metaphor for every private war that public success doesn't automatically win. By the early 1990s, Oprah had begun working with a personal trainer, Bob Greene, and had shifted from crash dieting to what she described as a sustainable, exercise-based approach. She discussed this on the show. She discussed it in O Magazine, which she launched in 2000. She discussed it in interviews, but the weight was never the real story. The real story, which she spent years excavating in therapy and eventually discussing publicly, was the relationship between the abuse she'd experienced as a child and her relationship with food as an adult, the eating as numbing, the weight as armor. The specific psychology of a woman who had learned in the most traumatic circumstances that her body was not reliably her own, and who had built up physical and emotional fortifications against that vulnerability. This was not the language she used in the 1980s. It became the language she used in the late 1990s and into the 2000s, as the therapeutic framework for trauma became more widely understood and more widely available in popular culture. A popularization that, it's worth noting, the Oprah Winfrey Show itself played no small role in producing. The private pain wasn't just about weight. Through the early 1990s, Oprah was in a long relationship with a man named Stedman Graham, a businessman who was, by all visible accounts, a genuine partner and a stable presence in her life. She has been publicly engaged to him once, in the late 1980s, and she called it off. She has never married. She has spoken, over the years, about the fear of repeating her mother's patterns, about the complexity of intimacy for someone whose early experiences had associated vulnerability with danger. Here's the thing, the public visibility of these struggles was not accidental or simply confessional. It was integral to the show's function. Each time Oprah disclosed something difficult about her own life, she was extending an implicit invitation to the audience. You can say this too. Whatever version of this you're carrying, you can say it. The technical term in media criticism is parasocial bonding, the relationship viewers develop with a media figure they've never met. Oprah's parasocial bonds were, by the measures available, the strongest in the history of American television. Women who'd watched the show for years described her the way they described close friends. They called her Oprah, always just Oprah, first name only, the way you refer to people you know. The commercial implications were staggering. When Oprah mentioned a book, its sales spiked by hundreds of thousands of copies, sometimes millions. When she endorsed a product, the company's customer service lines backed up. When she declared that she loved something, beef, in 1996, before that particular decision became a serious legal problem, her viewers believed her, trusted her, went and bought it. The weight, the confessions, the visible struggle, these were not obstacles to the brand. They were, paradoxically, the core of it. Not because audiences enjoyed watching someone suffer, but because watching someone navigate difficulty with persistence and honesty validated their own experience of doing the same. By the mid-1990s, Oprah Winfrey had become something that American culture rarely produces and almost never sustains. A figure of genuine moral authority in the lives of tens of millions of ordinary people, not political authority, not intellectual authority, moral, the sense that this person's values could be trusted, that what she said she believed, that authority was enormously valuable. It also attracted, inevitably, people who wanted to challenge it. On April 16, 1996, during an episode about the dangers of mad cow disease, Oprah Winfrey said this, live on national television. The information she'd just heard had stopped her cold from ever eating another burger. Within days, the cattle futures market dropped by $3 a hundredweight. The loss to the beef industry was later estimated at $11 million or more. A group of Texas cattlemen sued her. The case, Texas Beef Group v. Winfrey, became one of the most closely watched First Amendment cases involving a media figure in the 1990s. The cattlemen argued that Oprah's comment, made on a show watched by millions by a host whose food endorsements moved entire product categories, constituted actionable defamation of perishable food products under Texas state law. Oprah moved her show to Amarillo, Texas for the duration of the trial. She produced live episodes from there. She appeared in court every day in a fur coat that the cattlemen's attorneys found, according to press accounts at the time, somewhat theatrical. She won the case, but the lawsuit revealed something important about the nature of Oprah's power that she had perhaps not fully reckoned with. At a certain scale of influence, even casual statements, things said in passing, on live television in reaction to information presented by a guest, could move markets, shift behavior, and generate nine-figure losses for entire industries. This wasn't just commercial influence. This was the kind of influence that usually belongs to governments. The cattle case was the most dramatic of the controversies, but it wasn't the only one. Throughout the late 1990s and into the 2000s, Oprah's book club created similar, if less litigious, tensions. When James Frey's memoir, A Million Little Pieces, turned out to contain significant fabrications, Oprah had publicly championed it, had defended it initially after the fabrications were reported, and had then reversed course and brought Frey back on the show for what became one of television's more uncomfortable on-air confrontations, a live interrogation of an author she'd trusted, conducted with barely contained fury. That episode drew criticism from two directions simultaneously, from journalists and writers who felt Oprah had defended Frey too long before reversing, and from viewers who felt she had been too harsh on him once she did. She satisfied neither camp. She didn't particularly try to. What's interesting about the controversies is not their content, but their structure. Nearly every major controversy in Oprah's career followed the same arc. She acted from a genuine position, stated it publicly, faced resistance, absorbed the resistance, and emerged either vindicated or modified but not destroyed. The cattle lawsuit, the Frey confrontation, the various theological or dietary or medical positions she championed that were later questioned. None of them significantly damaged the core of her audience relationship. Consider this. In 2009, Dr. Mehmet Oz, amplified enormously by Oprah's endorsement, was later criticized extensively for promoting medical information of questionable validity. Some of that criticism extended to Oprah for having platforming him. The criticism was legitimate. She acknowledged parts of it, said less about others, and continued. The point is not that she was above accountability. The point is that her audience relationship had been built on something resilient enough to survive accountability. The trust was structural, not transactional. You don't abandon a relationship because you disagree once. You abandon it when the foundation fails. The foundation in this case was the perception of authenticity. As long as Oprah appeared to her audience to be operating from honest conviction, even wrong conviction, the relationship held. By 2002, the show had been running for 16 years. The controversies were real, but so was the record. 47 Daytime Emmy Awards, consistently the highest-rated program in its time slot, the most powerful consumer endorsement vehicle in American media history. And Oprah, at 48 years old, was doing something that almost no one at the peak of a media career does voluntarily. She was building the infrastructure for life after the peak. Most people, when they reach the summit, stay there until someone pushes them off. Oprah Winfrey did something different. She identified the summit, noted it carefully, and started building the next mountain while she was still standing on the first one. The diversification of the Oprah media enterprise didn't begin in the late years of the Oprah Winfrey Show. It began almost simultaneously with the show's success. Harpo Productions, incorporated in 1986 and fully owned by Oprah by 1988, was always conceived as more than a production company for a single television program. It was a media and entertainment company that happened to currently be producing one extremely successful television program. The film work came first. The Color Purple connection with Spielberg opened Hollywood doors that had been firmly closed to most black artists and producers. Harpo Films produced Beloved in 1998, an adaptation of Toni Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, with Oprah as lead actress and co-producer. The film was a critical experience that taught Harpo a great deal about the gap between prestige and commercial viability. Beloved won critical praise and performed below expectations at the box office. The lesson was absorbed. Harpo's subsequent film and television production work showed a sharper eye for commercial positioning alongside creative ambition, a calibration that manifested most visibly in the OWN network and in the production partnerships with major streaming platforms that followed decades later. The Oprah magazine launched in April 2000 in partnership with Hearst Corporation. It was, at launch, the most successful new magazine in publishing history, selling 1.6 million copies of its first issue. Let me put that in context. Most new magazine launches consider 250,000 first-issue sales a success. Sold more than 6 times that. By 2001, it had reached a monthly circulation of 2.5 million, making it one of the fastest-growing publications in American media history. What's interesting about O magazine is what it represented structurally. The magazine wasn't competing for the same audience as the television show. It was deepening the relationship with the same audience through a different medium. A publication you could hold, annotate, return to, share. The television show was daily and ephemeral. The magazine was monthly and permanent. Together, they created a media relationship that occupied multiple dimensions of a reader's and viewer's life. The book club was a similar multiplication. Launched in 1996, Oprah's book club became the most powerful literary endorsement mechanism in history. When Oprah selected a book, particularly a lesser-known title, its sales routinely increased by 500% to 1,000%. Publishers began designing cover stickers in advance of the possibility of selection. The phrase "an Oprah's book club selection" became, in commercial terms, worth more than any advertising campaign a mid-sized publisher could afford. Here's the thing about the book club. Its commercial impact was real and enormous, but its cultural impact was arguably greater. Oprah was, through the book club, doing something that educators and librarians and literary critics had been trying unsuccessfully to do for decades. She was convincing enormous numbers of non-habitual readers to read serious literature. Not beach reads, not genre fiction. Toni Morrison, William Faulkner, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. She was not doing this because it was commercially optimal. There were easier books to champion that would have generated the same commercial bump with less friction. She was doing it because she believed in it, because Oprah Winfrey's reading lists had made her a reader in the deepest sense, and because she thought the books she loved could do something for the people who read them. OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, launched on January 1, 2011, replacing the Discovery Health Channel on cable. It was, initially, a significant struggle. The early ratings were disappointing. The programming hadn't found its voice. Critics wrote premature obituaries. By 2013, OWN had found its audience through a combination of talk programming, reality content, and most significantly a partnership with filmmaker Tyler Perry, whose melodramas and comedies generated the kind of loyal viewership that cable channels survive on. By 2015, OWN was profitable. By 2017, it was one of the fastest-growing networks in cable television, particularly among Black women viewers aged 25, 54. The full picture of the Oprah enterprise by the mid-2010s included a production company with projects in television, film, and streaming, a magazine with multi-million monthly circulation, a book club with market-moving endorsement power, a cable television network, a satellite radio channel, investments in companies including Weight Watchers, in which she purchased a 10% stake in 2015, a stake that more than tripled in value within months of her announcement. That Weight Watchers investment is instructive. She wasn't hired as a spokesperson. She bought equity. Again, the same instinct that had driven her to own her own show in 1988, to own her own production company, to take stakes rather than salaries wherever possible. It was still operating 3 decades later with the same fundamental logic. You don't build wealth by being paid well. You build it by owning things. The number arrived in 2003. Forbes magazine, which tracks the net worth of the world's wealthiest people with the specific obsessiveness of a field researcher cataloging an endangered species, listed Oprah Winfrey's net worth at $1 billion. She was 49 years old. She was the first Black woman in history to appear on the Forbes Billionaires list. The immediate response from some quarters was predictably reductive. The story became about the symbolism of the number, about representation, about what it meant for Black women, about the American dream. All of that is real and worth discussing, but it's worth understanding how the number was actually built, because the mechanism tells you more about Oprah's deliberate strategy than the symbolism does. The billion wasn't a salary. You cannot earn $1 billion through wages in one lifetime in entertainment, regardless of how well compensated you are. Oprah's salary from The Oprah Winfrey Show, at its peak, was in the range of $300 to $400 million total over 2 decades. Extraordinary, almost incomprehensibly large by normal standards, but not $1 billion. The billion came from ownership, specifically Harpo Productions, which by 2003 held the rights to one of the most valuable media properties in history. It came from the magazine, which was generating operating revenue with Hearst, but in which Harpo held a significant equity position. It came from real estate, multiple properties, including a $50 million estate in Montecito, California. It came from investment returns and from the compounding of prior income into assets. The billion was an architecture, not a paycheck. It was the result of 15 years of deliberate equity accumulation by someone who understood, from her first contract negotiation in 1986 that the difference between earning money and having wealth was the difference between being paid for your work and owning what your work produces. This is not a complicated insight, but it is an extraordinarily rare practice. Consider this. The vast majority of the most successful entertainers and media personalities in American history were paid, sometimes extravagantly, and owned nothing. Their value accrued to studios, networks, production companies, distributors. When the work ended, the payments ended, and whatever had been accumulated was finite. Oprah owned the studio. When The Oprah Winfrey Show ended in 2011, after 25 seasons on her terms, at a time of her choosing, the production infrastructure and intellectual property assets it had generated remained in Harpo's possession. The show's library, the brand, the production capabilities, these continued to generate value after the last episode aired. By 2014, Forbes estimated her net worth at $2.9 billion. By the early 2020s, the figure had reached approximately $2.5 billion, fluctuating with market conditions and investment performance, as all portfolios do at that scale, but firmly and permanently in a category that puts her in rarefied company by any measure. The wealth also created influence at scales that the television show alone, as powerful as it was, could not have reached. She became a significant political figure in 2008 when she endorsed Barack Obama for president, the first time she had made an explicit political endorsement. Economists at the University of Maryland and elsewhere attempted, with varying methodologies, to estimate the impact of that endorsement on the primary race. The estimates ranged from 500,000 additional votes for Obama to over 1 million. None of these numbers can be verified, but the fact that serious academic economists were attempting to quantify the electoral impact of a single endorsement tells you everything about where Oprah's authority had arrived by 2008. She has been approached about running for political office many times. She has declined every time. Whether that represents wisdom or missed opportunity depends entirely on what you think the office can accomplish versus what she was already accomplishing. Here's the thing about the billion. It is, in some ways, the least interesting fact about Oprah Winfrey. It is a score, a measurement of accumulated value, but it doesn't explain or contain the thing that created it. It is the result of the story, not the story itself. The story is a girl from Kosciuszko, Mississippi, who learned to read in a country church, who survived things that should have broken her, who was given structure by a father who barely knew her, who found her voice in a Baltimore talk show and her freedom in a Chicago studio, who understood ownership when the industry around her was still treating talent like inventory. That's the story. The billion is just how you count it. When you step back and look at the full picture of Oprah Winfrey's life and career, a few things become clear that get lost in the standard telling. The first is that nothing about her success was accidental. Not the emotional intelligence, which was forged in conditions that would have destroyed most people. Not the professional strategy, which was deliberate and consistent, and almost always oriented toward ownership rather than recognition. Not the audience relationship, which was built on a specific philosophy about disclosure and authenticity, and the therapeutic function of being heard. This was all constructed, deliberately, over decades, by a person who understood very early what she was building and made a series of specific, non-obvious choices to build it. The second thing that gets lost is the role of the structural barriers in shaping the specific nature of the achievement. Oprah Winfrey became a billionaire in part because the industry she entered in the 1970s and 1980s underestimated her so consistently and so completely that it didn't know to protect its interests when she started acquiring them. If the television executives of 1984 had understood what was in front of them, they would have structured her contract differently. They would have retained the ownership. They would have recognized that the audience loyalty she was generating was an asset being created, not merely a rating being achieved. They didn't see it. They saw a black woman who was good at a local morning show, and they gave her a national platform without understanding that she was going to own it. Their blindness was her opportunity. Not through deception. She has never been accused of deception in her business dealings, but through the simple mechanism of asking for what she needed, clearly and specifically, at moments when the other party hadn't thought to say no yet. The third thing is the complexity of the legacy. She is one of the most influential people in the history of American media. She popularized therapeutic language and emotional self-examination in mainstream culture in ways that are genuinely difficult to separate from her show's decades of reach. She made serious literature accessible to millions of readers who would not otherwise have encountered it. She demonstrated, with her specific life and her specific success, that the categories American society had placed her in at birth, black, female, poor, abused, were not destiny. She also promoted over the years products and ideas and people that caused harm. The wellness industry that she helped legitimize contains genuine treatments and genuine charlatans in roughly equal proportion, and the Oprah Winfrey Show elevated both with similar enthusiasm. The Dr. Oz platform was real, and the subsequent damage from it was real. The anti-vaccination narratives that gained mainstream traction, partly through her show, are real. These things coexist with everything else, not as disqualifications but as part of a full account. What the full account shows is a human being operating at enormous scale, with enormous power and enormous consequence, making decisions the way any person makes decisions, with imperfect information, real biases, genuine convictions, and the inevitable errors that accompany large ambitions. The real lesson here isn't that poverty can be escaped if you work hard enough. Many people work hard and remain poor, and pretending otherwise is a comfortable story that serves those who have already escaped. The real lesson is about the specific architecture of her choices, the ownership structures, the equity positions, the refusal to be paid when she could be made whole, and how those choices compounded over time into something no salary, however large, could have produced. The provocative question that her story leaves open is one that American culture is still working through. What would it look like if the structural barriers Oprah had to work around were simply not there? If the television executives of 1984 had offered the same ownership opportunities to every talented black woman who walked into their offices, how many Harpo Productions would exist today? How many billions went unbuilt because the talent was paid rather than owned? Oprah Winfrey's story is extraordinary, partly because it happened against the odds. It should make us ask hard questions about why the odds were structured the way they were, and whether they still are. She walked onto a set in Chicago in January 1984 and began the work. The audience found her immediately. They never left. Whether we like it or not, the world she built was built in public, in plain sight, one episode at a time, and it changed the shape of everything that came after it.